Okay, good morning, everybody. Before we start with the speech, let's tell each other what coffee we're drinking. Marty, what are you drinking?
Actually, it's water today. Right now, just a few minutes ago, it was what's called Snow Ride by Blip. Here in the city. It's a blend of Rwanda and something else. So, a little local roaster shout out.
Kaleb, how about you?
Well, I started the morning with the Ethiopian pour over and drove to work. When I got here, it needed a double shot of espresso, so it's sort of a red eye now. It's morphing into more caffeine, essentially.
Kurt, what are you drinking?
A nice Guatemalan from a local roaster called Cosecha del Sur.
I'm drinking a really sweet blend called Campfire Blend from a local roaster in Michigan, David Myers from Mighty Good. It's incredibly tasty. So let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Expert, Season 3, Episode 15, Season 2, Episode 15, on what a tech needs to know about coffee. My name is Highland Joseph. I'll be your moderator. Today, our presenter will be Marty Rowe. Our panel will consist of Kaleb, Leach, and Kurt Benedict. We will, excuse me. We will have Marty present for a while, and then we will allow up to 30 minutes for question and answers. We will also provide listeners with contact info for a copy of the PowerPoint or comments. The Ask the Expert series is for everybody. This is our second season. This season consists of 10 episodes. We're committed to presenting these episodes throughout the year. So same Fridays at 8 p.m. for the Coffee Tech Guild. Kaleb, you want to let them know what episode 10 is going to be since it hasn't been posted yet?
Episode 10 next week.
The 10th episode is going to be meters, where, when, and why.
Thanks, Highland.
I just realized you weren't part of the meeting. So please keep in mind, everybody, this presentation is for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this webcast are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any aspects of the Specialty Coffee Association, the Coffee Technicians Guild, or the people that they work for. With that, I'd like to introduce Marty Rowe. Marty, why don't you start by telling us about yourself before we get started?
Hi, I'm Marty Rowe. I'm out of Kansas City. Wide world of specialty coffee. Late '99, 2000. Was drug in like a lot of people. Had always been a Folgers type drinker, and local roasters started having little events and offering coffees and stuff, and wow, that tastes different. And so that drug me in. Being born with a crescent wrench in my hand, it wasn't moments that I discovered that, hey, I need to jump into that and find out what that's all about. So long story short, opened a service company, and within just a couple of years of that, and then also a SCA training lab for barista skills and roasting and things like that, which we're morphing that portion into a tech training school. And as curriculum and standards continue to come out from the SCA, we'll have them offered, but we're also offering, we're slow right now due to COVID, not doing face-to-face. So let's get COVID out of the way and start teaching some people. So that's really me. That's what brings me. I have a love for coffee and a passion for turning wrenches on stuff.
So Marty, really quick question. What is this AST Tech P program you were talking about?
Well, it's a basically when the tech guild, coffee tech guild got together, we knew it was very important to not just be a social group. We wanted to provide a pathway, some way that technicians around the country could get on this merry-go-round at whatever skill set that they currently are at, whether they're a barista that is just curious about everything and think that might be a career path for them, or someone that's been working on equipment for quite a little while and have learned what they've learned, kind of baptism by fire. We wanted to be a resource and a source of information for really all of those people. So the AST, which is not, that certification is not just just for coffee techs. That's all the training, certification. The people that are certified to train for SCA in whatever curriculum or whether it's roasting, whether it's barista skills, they all have an AST certification verifying that they are able to present that information. And I believe, Highland, I believe you are AST certified in the tech side. Are you?
The two of us are, my man.
Awesome. So I'm real excited about that, offering that up. Does that answer your question there?
Yeah, thanks. Let's get started.
Okay, so it's up to me. All right, years and years ago, and this I'm going to invite people to just, you know, shoot your questions in. This is pretty casual presentation. This isn't something we've got a lot of polish on presenting. This is just from our hip, things we're really passionate about. To the point that a few years ago, and not to draw out, Mark Kennedy, draw out a long story here, but Mark Kennedy from down south, he met me at one of the SCA events, and our interaction wasn't what I thought it was. I thought it was a good interaction, and he thought I was kind of a butt, which we've resolved that. But what the topic was that kind of turned him off a little bit was this topic. I was pretty passionate about a good tech or a tech that's reaching his or her potential has in their abilities, competencies, bag of tricks, if you will, the ability to analyze, well, no coffee, no extraction rates, water to coffee ratios and how that affects, no more than just how a thermostat works or how to turn a wrench, but actually know so that you can partner better with the customers that you come into. So here's a slide that Highland had put in, and we'll just go down quickly through that kind of talks about that. I love the cup there, by the way, Highland. That could be a great t-shirt also. But the number one thing, it makes you more valuable as a problem solver. Anything that you can do in partnering with that customer, whether it's a barista or a shop owner, they've got a problem. That's why you're there. So if you're that problem solver, and it may not be a technical problem, it may be a process within their coffee process. So you know that leads credence to knowing something about coffee extraction. Helps you learn what results to expect when you make an adjustment. We're going to be making adjustments, whether you're solving a problem or whether you're setting up equipment. There's adjustments that need to be made. I kind of relate that to if you have a guitar, you've got to tune it. Otherwise, it's going to perform so bad that you don't know if it's you or whether it's the guitar, but what's coming out of it sounds pretty bad. If you don't know how to dial in that coffee with that equipment, it can be putting out hot water, but it may not be putting out a product that's palatable. Helps you pick the right thing to adjust. In these adjustments, there's different cause and effect that we'll kind of experiment with that. And I want to hear some comments out there from people that have done that they got the result maybe they didn't expect. So we'll talk about that. And lastly, it allows you to meet your customers where they're at. And what I mean by that is not that you met them at their cafe. A lot of the baristas, a lot of the other people that we deal with as a technician that are not technicians, their focus on where they're at in life is, they are centered around extraction rates. They're centered around, back a few years ago when the Mojo thing came out, where we started playing with the TDS of coffee extraction. They're into those numbers and they're there. I'm not advocating that we have to be to that level, but you need to know the verbiage. You need to know where they're at and the theories behind what's going on there. So it helps you communicate with them. It helps you partner with them, and they will have a lot more comfort level with your abilities as a technician if you can share that conversation with them. Next slide there, Isla. We're going to talk a little bit about the coffee brewing control chart. And again, I don't want to dwell a lot on this today, but I want you to be aware that it's out there and it's a tool. And that's really kind of the central focus on what we used to call the Gold Cup standards, is this chart. And it's kind of a, if I do this, then here's my result visually on this chart. So it helps define what is generally accepted as a good cup of coffee. Now, I will say that there's no hard fast rule that says that you have to have it at exactly this TDS with this percentage of extraction. Every coffee is different. There's a lot of variables. The coffee's different. The taste preferences are different, and that can vary from region to region. So there's a lot of variances, but we do know what a general ballpark good cup of coffee is, and we need to try to steer to there. Brady Butler probably said it best in one of his presentations. He said this chart and the fundamental activity within that chart, view it like your GPS. Your GPS is going to take you to the parking lot of the store you're shopping in, but you still got to get out and go pick up those socks or whatever you're shopping for. So it's going to get you close, but then with your taste skills, and you really have to rely on taste as feedback to tweak that. It also allows you to quantify some things. The next point there is to work with consistency. If you're familiar with the standards and this chart and some of the numbers that are applied, it allows you to be repeatable at your next setup or your next job that you're charged with trying to make it taste as good as you can. Gold Cup helps us teach what parameters and can and should be adjusted. So they give you the tools, whether it's grind coarseness, ratio of water to coffee, things like that. So there's always a cause and effect. One can kind of emulate the other, but it's going to be a little bit different. And the chart allows us to kind of visualize what's happening with the result of our cup. Any questions out there with the panel?
Yeah, how do you, when you're working with like a small business, Marty, how do you communicate this? How do you train your tech to eloquently communicate this without being the tech that's like, well, I'm right, to your customer?
Oh, that is probably a great question. And we all have seen this even within the barista world, and I'm not throwing baristas under the rock, but it's stereotypical. There's been videos on it and a lot of humorous stuff that we can get pretentious with our viewpoints. So what we try to do with our techs is to educate them as much as we possibly can, give them the tasting skills so they know what a full body versus a real thin body coffee tastes and feels like. And so we give them those skills, but also really hammer down that there's no hard, fast rule, and what the goals of that other person that you're working with may differ from what you think might be right, and you need to communicate with that so you reach their goals. And it's more of a relational kind of thing. The more we really try to impress with them, the more that you're a listener, the more they will listen to you when it comes your turn to talk. So it is very important because one coffee shop may have a different set of goals. This coffee shop may have their customers and their owners and baristas. They may like a dark, a lot of roast notes type cup of coffee. You can't go in there and say that that's bad. Their customer base may like that. So you have to, again, meet them where they're at. Does that make sense there, Highland?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
All right, next slide. All right, I don't know how many people, I know we've got a lot of listeners and not viewers, so I'll try to describe this chart. And it has evolved, especially since the SCA and the SCAE merged. That was one of the things that we realized. I said earlier that taste from region to region can vary, or taste preferences from region to region. We discovered that in Australia and the European countries that they like a thicker, more of a body coffee than what the US tends to like. I think, I don't know, maybe it's because a lot of us grew up with using the recipe off that Folgers can, which makes a fairly thin cup of coffee. So we may be coming from a viewpoint that that's what we grew up with. But nonetheless, that does vary. So this particular chart, thank you, Brady Butler, this is the newest, latest, greatest. And I'm just going to briefly go over this. And it's a tool that you can use to establish what's going on in a drip coffee type extraction. There's numbers on the left column. That is the strength of the solubles. It's what they call the TDS. If you guys are familiar with the VST's TDS meters, it's not the TDS meters that we use to dip in the water to find out what minerals are in it. This is to determine, it does a color analysis via this device that determines what kind of dissolved solids we've brought out of that coffee into the actual extraction. And that's reflected in a percentage, and that's in that left-hand column. And we've determined that somewhere between 1.15 and 1.45, that's the new number, percent of that cup or that sample is out of the coffee. So less than 2%, but there's a small range there. That we have decided as an industry that's an acceptable, that will get you in the ballpark of those solids. Now, it's very important because of flavor. We don't just want any solids in there. We want the right solids in there, which kind of takes us down to the lower horizontal numbers, and that's the percent of the actual particles of the bean that we've brought in. And that ranges from 18 to 20, 22. I should know that right off the top of my head. 18 to 22% of that bean was given up into that water. Now, where that's important and how we can actually apply it is we know that if you have a weak cup of coffee as a technician, you can either add more coffee or you can grind it finer. What's going to happen is two different effects on that, and you can see that on the chart. If you add more coffee, the end result will take less of a percent of that coffee bean into the water, so that number will be closer to that 18%. If you grind it finer, it's going to take it closer, maybe even beyond that 22%. When you start taking more out of the coffee, you start taking different flavors out of the coffee. So again, what this chart does is gives you the ideal, not a hard fast rule, but an ideal range that we've, as an industry, have decided that within that 18 to 22%, that's an acceptable range. That'll get you in the ballpark. Then those numbers up the right-hand side and over towards the top. Is this making sense, Kurt? I see you popped up there.
Well, I was just going to bring up, you're talking about the differences. Now, what do you, and this is for the techs out there, what do you say to them when they have a customer, or what would you say to a customer that doesn't want to meet these guidelines you're bringing up? They say they like it a certain way. What do you say to them? And that's my question.
That kind of goes along with what Highland was saying. What I would do in that respect is I would see if you couldn't get them to emulate. Maybe you haven't touched anything and they like what they're at, or they can describe what they're at. So if you can get a taste for where they're at, if you can meet them where they're at, have that discussion of what got them there. find out, why that is, what they're basing that on. And I'll give you a really good example of why you'd break a rule here in just a second. But then if truly with your training and understanding that you feel that they would benefit from a better tasting coffee, I wouldn't try to drive it down their throat, but I would try to give them a sample of that. In other words, make some changes if you could, brew a sample, and let them taste that. See if maybe you can put the proof in your pudding to say that, because they may not understand on their coffee journey what is better or what could be better. But if they're the final say, they definitely are the final say. And not every customer out there is going to to meet your standards. But I'll give you an example real quickly of where breaking the rules actually, I had to take my hat off to these folks. Summer Moon, and I know we don't, we try not to push or pull, advocate any particular one, but they're a little unique. They roast on with wood. And I guess there's some others, and maybe they might benefit from this. They roast with wood. And part of their marketing is that it's a wood-fired roaster. And it probably would be beneficial if you could taste some of that wood smoke in their coffee. I set up one and only one shop, and I set their brewer up because I didn't have their coffee standards. Pretty much dead center of what that chart would be. Body-wise, flavor-wise, extraction percentage. I knew I was in the ballpark. Had a really pretty good cup of coffee. Didn't taste unique. It was just a pretty good cup of coffee. Their trainers come up. They changed all that. They had a really rich 12-to-1 ratio, and I was at about a 16-to-1 ratio. And it was 12-to-1. And my first reaction was shock and awe, because that's really pushing the envelope. If you're familiar with it at all, it's a pretty full body, pretty low on the percentage of the bean that gets extracted. A lot of the early notes that are being brought out of the coffee during the brew, and not so much of the latter stuff. So I knew they were pushing the envelope. So I tasted it. So the like I said, taste rules all. And guess what I tasted? I tasted a little bit of smoke that was not in the brew that I brewed. And so for them, that's what they wanted, because it fits their style, it fits their marketing, it fits what they're trying to produce. And it was a good cup of coffee. And it had a flavor note that could be marketed very well. So there's breaking of the rules, that I have to respect that owner there. Does that help there, Kurt?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to be able to have you give your example of what you say to coffee shops as a technician, or advice for the technician is what I was just trying to ask for.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's more, it's not so much a technician or anything. It's more of a really trying to partner with them and understanding where they're coming from. And it's more of a relationship communication thing than anything. It would be my suggestion. We definitely don't want to make them mad or make them think that we're arrogant. So that would be my suggestion on that. So I'd said several times that flavor is a rule, and as a technician, I'm not advocating that you have to go out and buy you an expensive TDS meter. I'm not saying that you have to really study and stay up late at night and learn all these charts and have to go to cuppings and really get real familiar with this whole standards of the Gold Cup. But you need to have a general understanding of what's going on. But the tool that you bring to the table that probably is the most important tool is to learn what on that flavor chart, what those differences taste and feel like. So your tongue is probably your best tool. Learn the flavor wheel that Highland's got popped up here. It talks about what you're going to smell. the flavor, obviously, the body, whether it's a high TDS, thick, kind of a nice thick mouthfeel, or whether it's thin, and what you're going to do to change that if you want to. And then, of course, the color. That's always a kind of a visual tactile feedback of how the extraction's going. So don't be afraid to use your personal skills and your personal sensory skills to achieve what you need to do. But it is nice to have the Gold Cup standards and that coffee brewing control chart to understand when you change something, what's going to happen. So next slide there, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop in there.
Marty, let's break this slide down a little further and go over each sensory element.
Well, of course, I can't see, but what this does.
First is aroma and flavor and body and color.
Well, obviously, aroma. This chart actually is a really good chart, and it kind of goes along with the Gold Cup. And one of the things that's really nice about some of these standards is it does tend to calibrate everybody to the same verbiage and the same descriptors. And this color wheel does that. In a lot of the classes that we teach, we encourage people to use only these. Now we do some classes that the sky's the limit, so you start getting the grandma's attic in there, but you're not going to find grandma's attic in here. But breaking it down to the four sensory worlds that this thing reflects are experiences that you're going to have with coffee. Aroma, what's it, it is what it is. It's what does it smell like? What's it smell like when you grind it? What's it smell like when you first introduce water to it? And obviously, what's it smell like? Because whoever's consuming that's the first thing that they experience is the wafting of the aromatics that are coming off the top of that cup. Every coffee is going to be a little bit different. Your water has a huge effect on that. Water quality has a huge effect on that. If you've got some organic materials in the water, they're going to be present much more in that aroma than maybe even in the taste. Obviously, the flavor is, again, once we've gotten past that aroma, the flavor is what it tastes like, not feels. What it tastes like. Is it sweet? Is it smoky? Is it woody? Is it those sort of things? Does it taste like berries or does it taste like leather? That's the flavor section of this. Now, body, that is a mouth feel. Now, a lot of people will confuse or kind of overlap a little bit of body with sweetness, because if it's a higher or thicker body coffee that has more TDS, more extraction in it, and actually feels, I describe it as, does it feel like you're drinking water or a cream? That's the mouth feel difference. Is it thick? Is it eggnog or is it water? That's the body. But like I said, sometimes people will perceive a thicker body as sweetness because sugar tends to slick things up and make it a little thicker. If you add some sugar to some lemonade, it increases the mouthfeel. So over time, we've kind of trained ourselves to that. So hence, there's been some arguments on if you steam your milk to the right consistency, it tastes sweeter. Part of that is that mouthfeel. It's part of that overall experience, that it's a thicker mouthfeel, and so you perceive it as sweeter. And then, of course, the color, you don't want it to be an off color by any means. Sometimes off colors means that your water's not correct. But it shouldn't be too thin. Most people don't evaluate it too awful much, depending on the color of the mug also affects that. But you will learn that there's kind of a range when you can almost look at it and know that, okay, yeah, that's not right. That's going to be too thin. There's not going to be enough body to it. There's not enough TDS. We need to make a change before you ever even taste it. It's just another clue.
Thank you, sir.
So the 6 essential elements, these are the tools or the cause and effect that kind of go around if you are dancing around that coffee brewing control chart. What tools are at your disposal to modify where you're landing as far as the end results within that chart. And along with that, they're very important with proper production of coffee. As a technician, you will evaluate these 6 things along with, is the machines working correctly? Are they doing the right method? No, before I digress, we'll just continue on this. I have a point to make, but we'll make it here in just a second. So number one, probably the number one thing is the coffee to water ratio. That, as a technician, and you're setting things up, if you don't have enough coffee in there and you're running quite a bit of water, you start getting beyond. There's 3 stages of extraction. One is the initial wetting of that, and what that first few seconds of that extraction, basically we're releasing gases and we're filling those voids with water to start opening up the cellular structure and getting in there and wetting and just allowing some of those solubles to kind of loosen up. Layman's terms or barista terms, that would be reflected. You see that in the bloom during a pour over. You pour that over, it blooms up. Those are the gases that are leaving, and those voids are being refilled with moisture and water from what you poured on there. The next stage is the actual extraction, where we're taking some of those solubles and we're washing it away and actually going through the filter media and into a container. Those early parts of that extraction, the wetting and the extraction, those are the easy soluble components that we're taking out. As a technician, it's pretty important that you know that we're saturating the entire body or the bed of coffee. If you don't have a good spray head pattern, you may be off to one side or another, or maybe it's dribbling right down the middle, so you've got a whole area that's not getting fully wet to get that opportunity. And so you'll have over extraction. So if you don't know what's going on with that and you taste an over extracted cup of coffee that come off that, and you know your ratio leads you to the physical aspects. Are we wetting all of it, and are we getting everything into that second stage of extraction? The latter part of that extraction process is called hydrolysis. And basically that starts carrying out some of the non-soluble stuff, some of the more organic materials and the roasted molecules that aren't being actually broken down into individual molecules that are being carried out. And those tend to be a little more tart, a little more bitter during the last section. And you're getting back to that water coffee ratio. That's very important on that ratio, so that you get the right amount of those 3 stages. Grind size, very important, because the surface area is going to determine how quickly we're giving up those solids, how quickly we get past that wetting stage and get into the extraction. The larger the particles, the slower the process that's going to be. So we need to match our grind size up with our brewing process. So if, in layman's terms, if it's a long brew, we're probably going to have a larger particle size as compared to, say, espresso, one of the shortest brews in our coffee industry, under 30 seconds in many cases. And so that's going to be the finest grind. So we need to match up the right grind size with the appropriate brew method, and then try to extrapolate or pull out that 18 to 22 percent of that being with that grind size within that time. Number 3 is the brewery equipment. Basically that's the method that they're doing. Is it a great big urn grinder that you're going to have, like a 7-8 minute pour over process happening to try to get these 6 gallons through there? Or is it a little pour over? Is it whatever method that is going to affect how that's extracted. Which takes us into, conversely, the brew, not the equipment, but the technique within using that. Whether you're adding extended contact time with the actual setup of the equipment, or if you're doing a pour over, you're pouring a little slower to extend that, or a little faster to run it through. The temperature of the water within that brew technique will quicken or slower the extraction process, giving you different flavors. And then turbulence. A lot of people don't think of, they know turbulence where you can stir a pour over, but your brewing devices will add turbulence also. The Seraphim, we've had several people here in Kansas City that have Seraphims, and they will vary the height of the pour over device that's underneath that to increase or decrease the turbulence because of the water that's coming down. It's just yet another tool within the technique of that brewing method. Obviously, and this should be right in the heart and center of any good technician, is the water quality. The Scott Manleys and Highland, thank you guys for providing information in venues like this to get water quality knowledge out there and what to do to combat different water challenges that are there. We as an industry, we went a long time that a filter was a filter was a filter, and we know that that's not true. We could spend hours and hours and hours on the water quality and the characteristics of what the water does to the coffee. Highland, did you have a question there?
Yeah, Marty, let's talk about really quickly the importance of a tech's basic knowledge of water quality. I mean, what I've found is I still run into companies where some techs don't understand basic water quality.
Sure, absolutely. The reference that I would refer you to is the SCA standards, and they have determined through a lot of research what the ideal water would be. And the elements that they're looking for is total dissolved solids, and that's basically what other than water is. Reason for that is that what other than water in there will have an effect on how it interacts with your coffee. And it also has a huge effect on how long your equipment's going to run. So the mineral content, the TDS, is very important. It needs to be colorless, odorless. Anything that's in that cup, that's in that water, you're going to smell. So that standard would also say that it needs to be free of any notable aromas and shouldn't have any color to it. Also, we talk about chlorides here of late. That's the equipment protection. There's naturally in water that you pull out of wells and groundwater and stuff. There are the opportunities to have some chlorides. Chlorides are they eat metals and things like that. So that's important. So I guess, and there's some other stuff, but I guess the important thing is to go to the resources like the SCA standards, go to these classes, go to the resources that you have available to you to find out what is the ideal water. And then just as important is how, when your water is not that, what filter to apply to it. I'll give you a really good example of having the wrong filter, although it's a great filter, is we need to soften the water. We need to take the calcium out of it for most of the equipment that we deal with. And one of the processes that's out there is called a weak acid process. It's an ion exchange, for those that are somewhat familiar with that, where it takes the calcium out and exchanges it for hydrogen. And that process, not to get too deep, basically one of the side effects is that it takes the pH or the acidity level to a lower number, which in other words, it's raising the acidity. It definitely, if you already start out with a slight acidic water and you run it through this type of filter, you're going to make it more acidic and more corrosive to your equipment. And we've seen some pretty catastrophic, just like the chlorides, pinholing and eating up screens and making your coffee taste bad that's coming out of the espresso machine. So the importance is to get familiar with the standards and what tools are out there to combat that. We could spend, like I said, and have tons on water quality.
Right. You put the brewing control chart as the next slide. Is that right?
Yeah, let's go back to I got one more item on the
filter media. Okay.
Just the filter media.
Caleb's up.
We have, yeah, Caleb, have you got a question?
Oh, well, I thought we were moving on. I wanted to add something to the essentials there.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, I think this is all great. And one thing that's not on here is coffee freshness, you know, so you don't know what you're going to run into when you're out in the field, and your customer might not know how old their coffee is. So, you know, all of these things sort of fall right out the basket if you got stale coffee. So it's important, I think, also to understand what you're working with in this essential elements component.
I think that's a great add-on to that. I absolutely, there's not one of us that's been in the industry very long at all that we haven't seen complaints from someone that their decaf is just doesn't bloom. It just, and it's because they don't go through it. You know, on average, it's about 10% of their sales, and they aren't.
And the coffee's, I bought the coffee 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. How many? I went to my father-in-law's house a year after we had taken him a gift package of some great regional coffees, and he was all excited that he was going to service some of those coffees a year later. Yeah. So
let's move on to your last point.
Yeah. Yeah. So we
allow some time for questions.
Really quickly. The filter media is somewhat important because it determines what particles, physical particles, are going to go ahead and get into the cup. Where a metal screen is going to let some of the insolubles and some of the oils get through there, which makes part of the experience of the cup. But you may not want that, and you might be able to correct an issue with a machine just because they're using the wrong. They thought they're saving money by going with a metal filter, and they end up not really liking that, not knowing that's what's causing the cup to be a little gritty at the bottom. Then the next step would be a cloth filter, replaceable cloth filter, which it lets some of the oils through, but traps a lot of the actual insoluble particles. Then of course paper filters are the most common, and that actually filters out most of all the filter media that's available out there. It's very important to have the right size filter. If you're blooming up and going over the filter as a technician, there's a problem you're going to be able to fix by just having them use the right size filter. They're just overflowing that, things like that. So yeah, I apologize. I'm sure that I talk way too much. So if we want to move on, I am okay with that.
No, my man, you're doing fine. Did you put this in by accident?
Just in case we needed to revisit that and have any questions on that.
I'm actually good with it. I've got a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the panel. For those of you who want a copy of the deck or a copy of the coffee wheel, my email is right here. Feel free and reach out to me, and I will happily email it to you. So I'm going to ask the controversial question that we discussed yesterday, Marty.
Okay.
And I actually want to hear from everybody on the panel because Kaleb, you come from a large company. Kurt, you're from a service company. Why does this matter? My tech is just there to fix the damn equipment. Why does he need to know how to taste coffee? Marty, let's start with you.
Oh, I've been talking all day. You want to start with me? Well, we kind of started off with it. It's the value of that technician. We are out there fixing problems. I learned a long time ago, they're not calling me because I'm my good looks. They're just not doing that.
Might be some of that.
so I'm there to usually to correct some sort of issue with them. We get a ton of calls that it just doesn't taste right. You have to absolutely have some fundamental knowledge of the proper brew technique to be able to fold that in to answer that sort of question. Another thing that's really important to us is I know which one of my techs are better at tasting and evaluating and setting up equipment flavor-wise than others. And so I will lean that. I'll try to train the ones, as we do, that need to know that. But the ones that have that in their back pocket that I know can't be fooled by something that's a taste or process issue, I will send them on calls that I won't send the others on, and thusly I pay them more.
Okay. Kaleb?
Will you repeat that question again, Harlan?
Why does this matter? I mean, why do I need to train my tech who's just there to fix the equipment? Or why does a tech need to understand coffee quality standards? Why is it important to a tech?
Well, I think my mantra for most of my career has been, you need to understand the product that the equipment you're working on is producing. I mean, if you don't understand what the end result's supposed to be, then how can you effectively repair that piece of equipment? So that's kind of where I've come from on it. And I think it's not like you need to be, you need to have like high level tasting skills. You're not necessarily a roaster. You're not trying to define the product for the customer, but you need to have an idea of what it is that it's going to make. And I want to kind of touch on the brew control chart. So I'll kind of go back to what Scott Manley said last week about testing water. If you're testing water every time you're on a service call, you start to develop an understanding of what the water is. It's 99% of the product. So it's a big portion of what it is you're doing. And once you start to understand that water in your area, and you know what's happening, you're better going to deal with it. So I'd say the same thing about coffee. We know there's a standard that we can test within. So if you have the refractometer and you test the brewed coffee over and over and over again, you start to see the results. That starts to define how you come in to approach a repair in the future. So now I've developed this experience and this learning over time where I've seen how if the grind's a little bit finer, the TDS is a little bit higher. If the temperature of the water is a little too low, the TDS is also. You start to see how all of the factors come together, and that ultimately makes you a better, technician and a better coffee professional for that matter.
Thanks. Kurt, how about you?
Well, I say this matters for the simple fact of when a lot of times when I go to a shop, it's because, let's say, the roaster dropped off the coffee and said, oh, I don't like how it's tasting, get your service repairman out here. Or even the owner of the shop stopped by and said, I don't like how this is tasting, get your service repairman out here. So if I show up and I have, a 1-2 year barista that really can't tell me that much about what they asked or what was told or why they were told to call me in. I need to be able to go approach that machine and go, okay, well, it's putting out brown water, but it's not good water, or it's not good coffee. So I need to know why the roaster or the owner said it was wrong. So by knowing these standards, you're able to know that. You're able to go above and beyond just knowing that the machine, it's not so much, this instance is not the machine is broken, it's knowing how to fine tune everything to make sure that everyone is happy, is what I say to that.
Okay, thanks. Doug Stoll's got a question. What's the best way to measure extraction? Solubles, yields, percentage, and then a question mark. Kaleb, you're out here pretty soon, so let's ask you first.
Sorry, so ask the question again, Holland.
What's the best way to measure extraction? And then you solubles, yields, percentage. What is the best way to measure extraction?
Well, I think using the coffee control chart is a great way to sort of create a standard around it. You know, ultimately, it's like Marty's been saying, it's hard to measure what is qualitative, right? So, you know, a customer might like something that doesn't fall within that range, but taking the standards that we have in the industry and applying them to your everyday life will get you in the space that you'll be good. So I'd say using the extraction yields and the overall percentage, you know, as a tool every day will help you be better at ultimately defining qualitative components to coffee, because that's ultimately like it is. You know, like I tell everyone that asks me like, what's the best tasting coffee? I say the one that you like the most. You know, it's ultimately up to you, and that's what's so great about the industry. But standards for repair are a whole different world. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that actually does. Kurt, what do you think?
I don't know if I'm the best one to ask on this one, because I have to rely on a refractometer to just know what is coming out on that one. So, because otherwise I'm all taste. I just go by taste and let everyone else tell me what they think. So I'm not the best one on that answer.
Okay, so Marty, before we go to you, we mentioned Brady Butler a couple times. Thank you, Brady. Brady mentions that the best practice to measure solubles concentration with a refractometer, then use the brewing control chart or extract mojo to calculate the solubles yield. Marty, what's your answer to the question?
Well, one, I agree with Brady
Of
that
course you do.
actually using a TDS meter to get your TDS on that, so you know what you got out and all that. But that being, we're talking to technicians here, so I'm more with Kurt on most of the time. Now the practice that I've done with the refractometer and achieving that and doing the math and getting all of those numbers, that practice is kind of like band practice with the sheet music. Then when you go out to perform, you don't take that with you, you play the music. And so my learning from doing that in the lab allows me to be like Kurt, where I go out and I know what it's supposed to taste like. If I want to raise the body of it and get higher TDS, and I don't know what the TDS is, but I know that it's too thin, but I don't want to over extract, I'm going to add more coffee, not grind it finer. And so in that, as a coffee technician, the cheapest tool you've got is to train your tongue.
That's a good point. We're going to take two more questions here. One of the questions I always ask is, how important is the barista in that relationship between the tech? And what can we do as techs to improve that relationship? Let's start with you, Kurt.
How important is the relationship? It's tremendously important. So I'll just start with let's say the local shops that maybe it's one or two shops owned by someone, and the baristas maybe interchange between the shops. Being able to walk in and talk to them and say, hey, I know what you're doing, or I know what you're going through, and talk to me, and understanding when they say, well, it kind of smells funny or kind of tastes funny, you understand what they mean by that. So if you're not used to talking to that barista, you're looking for maybe a bad taste, but then what they're actually just talking about is maybe it just machine made a noise. So
Right.
if you can't communicate with that barista properly, you're just going to be chasing your tail looking for what's wrong with that machine.
Okay. Kaleb?
Yeah, a couple of things there. One, the reason that I am in this industry is because I love the culture, and I don't think I would have stuck around that long if it wasn't so. Interacting with, ultimately the barista is my customer, and it's like when I go into a space, I have part of the picture. From the call that I got that said that, it's not working right from this way, or, the steam, I'm not making good foam, or the extraction times, or whatever the problem is. So that's just like part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is how does my customer use it? What are they trying to achieve? So I have to get to the bottom of that if I don't know what it is already. And that requires spending some time with the person that's working with the equipment that I'm about to service. So, what is your experience? Have you noticed anything in the last couple of days that would change how I might approach this repair, right? Like, some things are intermittent, and like, hey, it looks like it's working to me now. So what was your experience yesterday or this morning when you were having a problem? That helps inform how I'm going to approach what I'm going to do next to hopefully successfully repair the piece of equipment for my customer.
Thank you. Marty?
Oh, I agree with both of those analysis. Partnering with them is huge, and it really does stem around communication. And it's not so much that they have to know the same verbiage or the same words that you do. In fact, many times they don't know how to describe it in the terms that a technician would. But if you put yourself in their shoes and really partner with them and care about them, you're going to be able to figure out why they said or why they chose the words that they did, and be able to communicate. Now, if you choose to go ahead and educate them on some proper verbiage, that'll help you out in the future, but don't run it down their throat. Really appreciate the fact that they've experienced something that they need your help on, and try to meet them where they're at, and be an interpreter a little bit in that.
Okay. So last question, and we'll start with you, Kaleb, is how do you train your techs to handle the abusive owner who wants to serve craft coffee?
I think there's two parts to that question, Highland. One is the abusive owner, and the other is so.
But but you understand the question, and we've all run into this where it's like you get the cup of coffee and the person is not very nice, but you also get the cup of coffee and it's like, it's not good. Some customers just say it's not good. And you have to try. Your tech is out there standing naked in a field, and he's the one that's got to. Do you want the tech to communicate this to him? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's the abusive. No one deserves to get abused, and so I always told my techs, you have the right to walk away. The only thing I said was, if you got the machine completely torn apart, pull yourself together, put it back together, be professional. And explain that you're not going to stay there for that anymore. So I'm protecting the people that work for me from that. Now, the bad cup of coffee, I remember one of my very first, too long a story. Try as best you can to educate based on your experience and the standards that have been given to you by the industry. And then past that, really, man, it's their shop, it's their business, and they can run it how they want to.
Okay. Marty?
I'm not going to say we've ever had an abusive owner, but I would if it did happen. Well, basically, I would have a communication with whoever our contact is with them. And like Kaleb, our techs know that they can walk. They can call me and go, this is not good. So on the abusive side, it's if they're uncomfortable, say bye-bye, give me a call. And that next call would be me to the person that's being abusive. Usually the owner would be that person. And I would explain to them that we're more than happy to service their equipment, but it's going to be me that shows up. That I don't pay my technicians enough to put up with that. I'd throw it all on the table and I'd say, I'm not firing you, but it's going to be my face you'll see every time that you need service. And if you have to wait on that, you have to wait. But I'd put it right on the table. As far as serving bad coffee, it kind of goes along with the relationship. If they're serving bad coffee and want to serve better coffee, partner with them, teach them, train them, take them to that all those classes virtually that you've been through in your career. Lead them along. They're on a coffee journey just like you were way back when. So steer them. Now, if they're happy in their ignorance and their customers are happy and everybody's happy, then I wouldn't stir that pot. I would just do be the tool in the toolbox that they need for that day, and go on to the next call.
Thanks, Marty. Kurt?
Not much
Yes,
left to say. I mean, those two covered it really well. Like Marty said, if there is someone abusive, they have to wait for me. They're not going to abuse my techs. And then the serving bad coffee, I always look at it this way, unfortunately, is the customer has the right to tell me they want to serve it a certain way. And that's their choice. Because maybe they think it's good coffee. Because we can break it down by the numbers and say this is definitive per SCA, that this is the correct, this is good. But maybe they don't like it that way. So that's their choice. But as Marty said, we can try and teach them what we know. And if they choose to accept that, that's fine. If not, that's their own choice. That's all there is to it.
We're going to wrap it up, gentlemen. Marty, before we close out, you want to say anything?
Oh, I just want to, again, as always, I want to thank you, Highland, and thank everybody that's involved in putting these on. I'm hoping today kind of helps some people out. I know all of the others, these scheduled events that you guys have put on, there's some great information that's out there. It just helps move us all forward. So just thank you. And then as far as the topic that we talked about today, that better cup of coffee, whatever it takes, to make you a better technician, an overall, it'll earn you more money if you can answer those questions and build the confidence within your customer base that you can discern the difference between a mechanical problem or if they have a coffee problem. It wasn't that long ago, I had one of those calls that the coffee didn't taste right. The customer had a waiting room that he has his coffee every morning for I don't know how long. And this particular morning, the coffee tasted like ass, is what he said. And so, so I go.
Because we get that description a lot.
Exactly. So I go and make a long story short, come to find out they sent him the wrong coffee. I could have beat my head a long time, but I don't know if it's Kaleb or Kurt. One of them said, build, I think it's Kaleb. I'll give you the credit. Build that relationship and build that library on how things taste repetitively. And I knew what coffees they use. I knew what coffee that they should be drinking. I knew what that coffee should have tasted like. And I knew that even though it was labeled their coffee, it was not the same coffee. And so we followed up on it. Sure enough, it wasn't the same coffee.
Kaleb, how about you?
I just want to say thanks for letting me come on and share some experiences with you guys. Marty, it's amazing. Okay, thanks so much. I do have to run because I got a tech training I got
Sorry to get
to
you.
go to, and now I'm a few minutes late to go grab the tech.
Sorry
So
about that. Thanks for staying. And I
that's
think we
okay.
lost.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
You're next week, dude. So, okay, I think we lost Kurt. Did we lose you, Kurt? Or
Well,
did we lose your camera?
You lost my camera, but I just want to say thanks to everyone for being here and helping out, and thank you, Marty.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. So next week, we're going to be doing Preventative Maintenance 101. The Ask an Expert will consist of a manufacturer, a large corporate service company, a company like Marty's side, which is owned, and a single tech and some service managers. We'll go over discussing the when, where's, and whys of PMs, parts, how to build it, and the different perspectives. So thanks everyone for attending. I look really forward to seeing you guys next week. Marty, have a great weekend. Kurt, have a great weekend. Julie, you can lock us out.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.